There are places on this earth where darkness clings to every tree and stone, places that are better left forgotten. I found one of those places last autumn, hidden behind a grove of dead apple trees. Locals call it the Orchard of Quiet Screams. Some swear it's cursed land, some say it's home to something worse. I used to think it was just ghost stories, until I saw it with my own eyes. I'm sharing what I witnessed because I still can't sleep without seeing their faces. If you're easily disturbed, consider yourself warned. I was visiting my grandfather's old farmhouse for the weekend, nestled in a remote corner of the countryside. His property backed onto a dense forest. Among the thick trees lay a forgotten orchard, rows of gnarled apple trees with rotting fruit clinging to their branches. The smell was pungent, sour, sickly sweet, and something else I couldn't identify. Locals whispered that years ago, a small commune lived there, practicing bizarre rituals. People vanished. Eventually, rumors of foul deeds drew the authorities, but they found nothing except scattered bones and a sense of overwhelming dread. Being a skeptic, I decided to check it out for myself. I had no idea I was stepping into a waking nightmare. It was late afternoon when I started walking through the orchard. The trees twisted overhead, their branches like skeletal arms. The ground was soft, littered with half-rotted apples. Flies buzzed in thick, lazy clouds. The deeper I went, the colder it seemed to get. I heard something rustling in the undergrowth. At first, I thought it was just a raccoon or stray cat. But then the stench intensified. It was like spoiled meat and decaying leaves, a rancid mixture that made my stomach churn. When I turned a corner around a cluster of trees, I saw it. A dilapidated stone well in the center of a clearing, partially collapsed. Next to it stood an old wooden shack, its roof caved in. A crow perched on the roof, watching me with black, beady eyes. It gave a rasping caw that echoed unnaturally in the silent orchard. I approached the shack, carefully stepping over rotten boards. The door hung ajar, squeaking on rusted hinges as I nudged it open. Inside, I found a small table stacked with tattered paper, old photographs, and half-burned candles. Blood-dark stains marked the floor. At first, I told myself it might be oil or wine spills, but the coppery smell told me otherwise. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just some abandoned structure. Something horrible had happened here. I lifted one of the photographs, grainy, black and white. It showed a group of people in hooded robes standing in this very orchard. The old well in the background. In the front row was a young woman, eyes wide, mouth open in silent terror, as though forced to pose. A noise behind me made me freeze, like a slow scrape across wood. I whipped around, my flashlight beam sweeping the corners. Nothing but broken furniture and shadows. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling something was watching me. Stepping back outside, my eyes fell on the crumbling well. The wooden cover was rotted through, partially torn away. Holding my breath, I peered over the edge. The darkness below seemed endless, a stale gust of air wafting up with a nauseating odor. I leaned in with my flashlight. About 15 feet down, a slick, wet shape caught the light. My heart pounded. It looked like flesh. Something inside me screamed to leave, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. I found an old rope nearby, tied it to a tree stump, and lowered myself into the well just enough to see what it was. What I saw next will haunt me forever. Lying against the stone wall was a body, partially decomposed, limbs twisted. Its face was half-eaten by maggots. Worse yet, it looked fresh compared to the older remains piled around it. Others whose features had long since rotted away, leaving only bone, scraps of fabric, and dried tissue. The stench made me gag. I nearly dropped my flashlight in horror. Suddenly, I heard a raspy voice echo from below, so faint I thought it was my imagination. "Help me." My mind reeled. Was someone down there alive? Panic surged through my veins. I scrambled to climb out of the well. When I reached the top, I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, crunching fallen apples behind me. I spun around, breath hitching. A figure stood among the trees, face obscured by a tattered cloak. I couldn't see its features, just a ragged silhouette. It clutched a rusted sickle in one hand, the blade caked with something dark. My flashlight flickered, and I swear I saw droplets of black-red liquid dripping from the weapon. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my grip on the rope. The figure let out a guttural hiss and started toward me with a lurching gait. Fear exploded in my chest. I managed to pull myself fully out of the well, my legs trembling so badly I could barely stand. I bolted, ignoring the searing pain in my thighs as I sprinted through the orchard. Branches caught at my clothes, tangling in my hair. I could hear the figure's footsteps behind me, uneven yet relentless, accompanied by an eerie rasp, like it was whispering or chanting under its breath. In my blind panic, I fled in the wrong direction, right back to the rotted shack. The door slammed shut behind me, either from the wind or something else. I fumbled for a hiding place and spotted a narrow set of stairs leading beneath the floorboards. Against every rational thought, I descended into that pitch-black basement. The smell hit first, thick, rancid, suffocating. My flashlight beam revealed what looked like a makeshift altar. Candles, now melted into grotesque shapes, surrounded a slab of stone stained with dried blood. Chains were bolted to the edges, and clumps of matted hair clung to the iron shackles. Something, or someone, had been restrained here, possibly tortured. In the corner was a pile of bones, some still with bits of flesh attached, glistening wet. One skull had deep grooves carved into it, as though someone had tried to engrave symbols. My stomach twisted and I nearly vomited on the spot. A soft scraping sound came from the darkness behind the altar. I aimed my flashlight. A hand, grayish skin, stretched tight across bones, dragged across the floor, leaving a smeared trail of blood. Attached to that hand was a figure, half crawling, half dragging itself, eyes rolled back, mouth opened in a silent moan of agony. One of its legs was severed below the knee, torn muscles and tendons visible. I stifled a scream as the figure reached for me, raspy breath gurgling. It was still alive. I could see its chest faintly rising and falling, the body trembling in a futile attempt to move. I heard footsteps overhead. The creaking floorboards told me the sickle-wielding figure was just above. I needed to escape, but the only path I saw was a trap door at the far side of the basement, half hidden behind debris. I mustered my courage and sprinted across the room, jumping over scattered bones and dried viscera. The crawling figure let out a wet, agonized wail as though pleading for help. My chest tightened with guilt, but I knew if I stopped, neither of us would make it out alive. As I reached the trap door and pushed it open, I heard a deafening crash. The main door upstairs had been ripped off its hinges. Low, guttural chanting rumbled through the shack. My flashlight flickered again, threatening to plunge me into total darkness. I pulled myself up through the trapdoor and found myself outside, behind the shack, in a small clearing choked with weeds. Overhead, the sky had turned a bruise purple, the sun nearly set. Just when I thought I was free, the hooded figure emerged from around the corner, brandishing that bloody sickle. Now I could see part of its face, a leathery visage with sunken eyes, skin pulled taut over skull-like features. Lips parted to reveal blackened teeth, and it let out a hiss of such raw hatred that I stumbled backward. It swung the sickle at me, once, twice, barely missing my face as I dodged. I grabbed a broken tree branch on the ground and swung blindly, striking its shoulder. It barely flinched. A rancid smell wafted from beneath the hood like open graves and rotting leaves. With no other option, I shoved the branch like a spear, jamming it into the figure's chest. The sickle clattered to the ground. There was an inhuman screech, and the figure staggered backward, dropping to its knees. Thick, dark fluid seeped from the wound. In that moment, primal fear took control. I turned and ran, not caring if it was dead or just wounded. I tore through the orchard, ignoring the branches slapping my face, ignoring the screams and moans that echoed behind me. By some miracle, I found the old footpath that led back to my grandfather's farmhouse. I burst through the back door, my clothing ripped, my body covered in sweat and dirt, and maybe worse. I collapsed on the kitchen floor, gasping for air. When I finally caught my breath and looked back outside, the orchard stood silent in the distance as though nothing had happened. I told my grandfather everything. He called the authorities, who arrived just before nightfall. But when they searched the orchard, they found no cloaked figure, no fresh remains, only old bones in the well. The shack's basement was there, all right, but it looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Any traces of the living horror I saw had vanished. The investigators said I must have been hallucinating, perhaps from mold spores or some toxic fumes. But I know what I saw. I can still smell that stench, still see that trembling, severed limb reaching out to me. Even now, sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, certain I hear a rusted sickle scraping across my bedroom window. And when the wind blows just right, I swear I catch the faint scent of rotting apples. If you ever come across an orchard that's too quiet, too still, do yourself a favor and turn around. Some things are buried for a reason. Some secrets should remain hidden, because once you've seen what lives beneath those twisted trees, there's no going back.